Frankly, if iPhone or iPad or iPod is a pretty decent heuristic, at least to get all Apple hardware, if that's what you're targeting. But realize that Wurfel here is an initiative on the internet that has a bunch of open APIs that you can query in order to answer those questions. But there is a gotcha. So what is worth bearing in mind about HTTP headers in general when it comes to relying on them? Yeah. So they can be faked very easily. In fact, as we'll encourage in this course, faking them within Chrome or some other browser so you can trick the server into thinking you're an iPhone so that you can actually test on your desktop browser. They can be scrubbed altogether for people who are particularly concerned about privacy. They might have some special software that just scrubs all sort of identifying information. So it's not 100% reliable. So in that case, you sometimes do have to resort to JavaScript to figure out what the screen size is or what features the browser supports. But typically, at least detecting things server-side is one place to start. And then falling back on JavaScript is a reasonable next step. All right, so the appliance we'll allude to in more detail in the first project spec. But let's get a sense of the technologies that we'll be taking for granted, all of which are pretty representative of what's being used today for web and mobile software engineering. So LAMP is just a silly acronym that was applied a few years ago to describe 4 things that already exist: Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. So you will very commonly see LAMP on someone's resume these days, and it just means that they know or have used that particular combination. So it's actually fair to say that the CS50 appliance has a LAMP stack, which just means it has at least those 4 things installed. Now, why is this interesting? It's just super common. All right? One of the reasons we did use PHP and MySQL and CS50 is because, 1, the learning curve is relatively low, certainly coming from a language like C. 2, it's also just omnipresent. And even when you pay for a third-party web host or use someone like HCS, just servers very often have not only PHP installed and ready to go, it's also relatively easier to set up than something like Ruby and Rails or Python and Django, which are getting easier, but PHP just tends to work because it's been popularized for a little bit longer. So with that said, this is what the appliance has installed in it. What kinds of things might you use? So for the course's purpose, you and your partner can use pretty much any tools that you prefer. We will encourage or at least introduce you to some things that will hopefully help take you to the next level. gedit is probably not where you should stay your whole life. And a few years ago in 50, Nano, hopefully you're not still in Nano. But if you are, we'll fix that now. So among the most popular, just so that as part of this class you guys get exposed at least to some of the things that everyone else seems to know, or in a Facebook interview they would just kind of expect that you know. Emacs is particularly popular, especially among computer science type folks. gedit is actually not bad. It is definitely better than something like notepad.exe because it does have syntax highlighting, auto-indenting. So it's kind of a miniature source code editor, but it's still pretty simple and limited. In the Windows world, Notepad++ tends to be what most Windows users swear by, though there are alternatives there. Text Wrangler on the Mac, and Vim. These are all free options, and there's many, many other commercial options. So what's an IDE? Yeah. Yeah, integrated development environment. And what does that mean? Perfect. Yeah, it's like one application that tries to do a whole lot really just to save you time and sort of keep you immersed in one particular environment. So you compile in it, you write code in it, you might run tests in it, you might save and revise your code within it with source control. And just out of curiosity, how many of you have regularly used, for either a semester or a job, an IDE? OK, so most folks in this room. So for that, for the course, you're welcome to use most anything. What we've installed, what you will install via command in the appliance is one called NetBeans. And this is one of these religious things. Eclipse is another big and very popular one, as I mentioned here. Genie is now in the appliance as well. It's sort of a lighter weight version that we might use in 50 next year instead of gedit. Komodo Edit on the Mac. Aptana Studio is really just Eclipse customized for PHP. Long story short, you're welcome to use most anything you want. But if you're coming into the course with a little less comfort, a little less experience, we would recommend using, for instance, NetBeans because it does everything we'll need for the first 2 projects, and its learning curve is relatively low. My only personal gripe with Eclipse, for instance, over the years, is it's just very memory hungry. And I feel like it's the only IDE that consistently crashes on me. But this, too, very religious. So this is a fun debate you and your partner can have. And that's also by the design of the course. All right, so another little overview of things that will make our lives easier that we'll soon see in action. So thankfully, we don't need to implement the first of mobile websites from scratch, writing all the CSS yourself, trying to mimic the look of an Android device or iPhone or Windows mobile phone. Very much in vogue these days are these frameworks, which are typically CSS or JavaScript based, that just make it much, much, much easier for you to just make a site that's optimized for a mobile device, where you can focus on the content and the interesting features and not the stupid windows and icons and buttons and things that maybe you would like to focus on as a project in building your own library, but they're incidental to actually building an application. So the one we'll recommend and require that you use for the first project is jQuery Mobile, which just reached version 1.0 status. Sencha Touch is fairly sophisticated. Its learning curve is actually much higher. JQ Touch is still kind of lingering in this beta state, but they all do ultimately the same kinds of things. So let's get a quick sense of what they will now facilitate. So I'm going to go back into my appliance here. Let me close these earlier tabs. I'm going to go into the CS164 directory, and I just wanted to make up this weekend a very simple mobile website for the course. And I used a little bit of HTML5, which really boils down to using this tag here to make it mobile friendly, and then the usual suspects for a couple of links to lectures and the syllabus. So let me go over to my browser again, go into my CS164 directory, HTML, voila. So this looks pretty simple, and indeed it was meant to be. If I pull this up in a simulator, it's going to look just as simple, but thankfully readable. And it's a mobile website, right? You can kind of touch that link with your finger. It's not ideal, but it's not super small. And if you really want, and if you've not used the simulator before, if you hold down Option, you get little two fake fingers that allow you to pretend to pinch on the screen. So I could pinch on the screen and touch these links just fine. All right, but this is not really what you would expect these days. And it'd be nice if we could just say, make this look mobile, right? And you can with these frameworks. So if I instead go back into my CSS directory, let me first try to do it myself. Let me go into this file here. I'll open it up in gedit. So this is the CSS version that I made from scratch. And let me open up iOS.css. And the details here are not important, but notice that I have stylized tags like the H1 tag, the LI tag, the anchor tag, and so forth. And I took some time to come up with a border bottom, or someone spent the time coming up with a border bottom and color and display and padding and so forth, to give us like rectangular buttons and clickable things on the screen. So if I now include that CSS file in my same kind of HTML file, actually I'll do it in the simulator so it looks a little more compelling. All right, so it's simple, but it's a little sexier, right? It says CS164 at the top, kind of like an iPhone app. I can click Lectures. It changed, click Lecture 0. So it looks more reminiscent of an iPhone app. But what did it not do? Or what is it not doing that, for those of you with iPhones, might? Yeah, so the transitions were kind of like old school HTML, just page reloads, page reloads. It's not the sort of elegant right to left side swipe. What else is sort of not quite like a native app also here? Yeah, so you kind of see that you're obviously at cdn.cs164. So you have this address bar, which definitely kind of takes away from the UI. And frankly, the top of the UI is a mess now with the clock and the lecture 0 and the URL and then the lecture 0. So these are the kinds of things that people find fault with when it comes to just choosing between mobile websites versus native. So let's try to do a little better. Let me instead go into my third version of this, which is in the framework directory. Just one file this time, index.html. But notice what I've done here. So let me zoom in here. Just one file. Demonstrates jQuery Mobile. So I've included a couple of things. So those who've played with CSS and JavaScript a lot know you can include files up top like that. So I've included those as per the documentation on jQuery Mobile's website. And if I scroll down, now this library is actually taking advantage of some very HTML5 specific features. One of the nice things about HTML5 is that by design, you're allowed to have any attributes you want on elements that begin with the word data, followed by a hyphen. So maybe not the best of names or a little verbose, but it allows you to have arbitrary attributes on your elements that will not result in validation failing, if you care about validating against like the W3C's validator. So what this jQuery Mobile library is doing is it's using this data prefix to define a few conventional attributes that allow you to semantically tag the data in this file with its meaning. So apparently at the top here, they've decided that if you use a data role attribute, you can say that the following labeling division of the page, this block level element, is a quote unquote page. And we give it an ID as usual. But then nested inside of that is another div. Its role is header. Beneath that is another div whose role is content, and so forth. So HTML5 and this library are really embracing this idea of using this additional metadata to ascribe some meaning, semantic meaning, to the various chunks of data on the screen so that now the framework can render those things a little differently. Now, you might use CSS classes for this, and you could. And historically, this is what people would do. They would have a .content class or .header class. But that was kind of the overuse or abuse of that feature of classes. This is really meant